Ranches of the American West by Carmelo Campos. Spanish origins of American ranching. Cattle and horses were first brought to Mexico and the American West in the 1500s by Spanish explorers. The cattle were able to live on the western grasslands without much help from people. By the late 1700s, many cattle ran free on huge ranches on the western frontier. California missions and Native Americans. Some of these cattle were taken to the California missions. Missions were places started by the Spanish to teach their religious beliefs to the Native Americans. The missions had schools, churches, and ranch land for raising cattle. Native Americans worked on the mission ranches. They herded cattle. Later, some Native Americans were given ranch lands of their own. Native American families still operate cattle ranches in parts of California. Ranch words from Spanish. Many of the English words used in ranching today have origins in Spanish. Some of these words are listed below. The growth of ranching. By the 1870s, people throughout the United States and Europe wanted more beef. There were millions of longhorn cattle roaming throughout the western states. Ranch lands were open to many people. Pioneer families went to the west to start ranches. They built houses of sod or adobe. Sod was a type of thick grass and dirt which could be cut and made into building blocks. Adobe was made from clay and straw. After people built their houses, they rode on horses to round up cattle for their ranches. Cattle ate the grass growing on the plains. Once families rounded up cattle, they had to put a brand on them. A brand was a mark put on a cow which showed people who owned that cow. It was like a label. Once a cow was marked or named by people of a particular ranch, the cow belonged to that ranch. Each year, when new calves were born, herds were separated among the ranchers who owned them, and new calves were marked with the same brand as their mothers. By using this method, families who came to the West were able to own and keep track of large herds of cattle. The lives of ranchers were not easy. Families had to work hard. They had to grow vegetables and fruits in large gardens. They had to preserve the food for the winter. They had to cut wood for their fires. They had to make their own clothes. There were few stores in the early days of ranching, and many people had very little money to spend. Everyone on the ranch had to work together to take care of the animals. If it was too cold, cattle could freeze. If there was no rain, the cattle had to be taken to a place where there was water to drink. Cattle also had to be moved from place to place in order to find enough grass to eat. Everyone in the family helped with this work, especially when the new calves were born. Men, women, and children all worked together. When it was time to sell the cattle, ranchers hired cowboys to help them drive the herd hundreds of miles to cities where there were trains. The trains would then take the cattle to other places where people would buy them. A cattle drive took months. It was dangerous work. The cowboys had to protect the herd from wild animals like coyotes and wolves. They had to make sure the cattle were fed and watered. Sometimes the ranchers made money when they sold their cattle, and other times they did not. Still, ranch families survived, and cattle ranching became an important part of the American economy. Today, ranchers use machines, such as tractors. Today's ranches. Today, ranching is still an important part of the American economy. Beef from American ranches is sold all over the world. In some ways, Ranching today is still the same as it was years ago. In other ways, ranching today is different from ranching in the early years. Today, ranchers use machines to do jobs that early ranchers did by hand or on horseback. Most ranchers use trucks, tractors, snowmobiles, and different farm machinery and equipment. Ranchers need to be good at working with animals, but they also need to be good mechanics. Today, most ranchers do not depend as much on wild grasses and plants to feed their animals. They grow hay and other foods to prevent animals from starving in the winter. Ranch families do most of their own work. Everyone has a job to do. First, there is the usual housework that all families have to do, such as cooking, cleaning, and other household chores. Then, there is the special work of the ranch. Children who grow up on ranches learn to ride horses, help with gardens, fix and use ranch machinery, and take care of animals. They learn to do these things by working with adults. But like all other children in America, ranch children also attend school and do homework. Spring Roundup on a ranch. Ranch families sometimes have a cookout after the spring roundup. The spring roundup. In the spring, calves are born. Each year, calves must be rounded up or gathered together. Then they are marked with the ranch brand and immunized against disease. They also must get ear tags, which contain important information about each calf. All of these jobs are hard work, but ranchers make them fun. During the spring roundup, families get together to help each other with the work. The roundup is a festive occasion and can get very rowdy. The roundup is noisy, tiring work, but at the end of the day, many families have a cookout to celebrate the roundup. They sing, talk, and tell stories about adventures they have had. It is a time of year that everyone remembers for a long time. Even though ranch work is hard, there are days when there is not much work to do. On those days, parents and children might go into town or visit a neighboring ranch. They might go romping through the grasslands on horseback, looking at wild flowers or at a beautiful western landscape or scene. Or they might just sit home and enjoy dinner fresh from their garden. Most ranchers love their way of life. Some families have been on the same land for many years. Others have moved to the West in recent times to find wide open spaces. Would you like to live on a ranch? Talk about it. 1. What are some of the jobs that ranch families must do? 2. What would be different for you if you lived on a ranch? Write about it. 3. Write about the different things that ranchers must do to keep their cattle healthy and their ranches working in good condition. On a separate sheet of paper, make 2 columns to list the activities. Extend language. The suffix er can be added to some verbs to name a person who performs this action. For example, a rancher is a person who ranches. What is a person who dances called? Hint: when a verb ends in E, drop the final E before adding er.